In September 2015, the United States Environmental Protection Agency sent a letter to Volkswagen. The letter informed them that their diesel engines were producing nitrogen oxide emissions up to 40 times the legal limit. Volkswagen already knew. They had always known. 11 million vehicles, 12 countries, a decade of deception. This is not a story about a company that made a mistake. This is a story about a company that made a choice. To understand what Volkswagen destroyed, you first have to understand what they built. Founded in 1937 in Wolfsburg, Germany, Volkswagen, literally, the people's car, was created to do exactly what the name promised, put ordinary Germans behind a wheel. By the 2000s, the company had evolved into something far more ambitious. Volkswagen Group had absorbed Audi, Porsche, Lamborghini, Bentley, Seat, and Skoda. It was no longer a car company. It was an empire. By 2014, Volkswagen Group sold 10.14 million vehicles, edging past Toyota to become, briefly, the largest automaker on Earth. The board celebrated. The press celebrated. The CEO, Martin Winterkorn, reportedly received compensation of around 15 million euros that year. Everyone was very pleased with themselves. But the empire had a problem, a strategic one: America. The United States market had always been difficult for Volkswagen. Americans preferred large, gasoline-powered vehicles. Volkswagen's strength was in compact, efficient diesel engines built for European roads. So Volkswagen made a decision. They would not adapt to America. They would convince America to adapt to them. The strategy was called clean diesel. And it was, from the beginning, a masterpiece of marketing built on a foundation of outright fraud. Here is what Volkswagen's engineers actually knew. Diesel engines, by their nature, produce high levels of nitrogen oxide, a pollutant linked to respiratory disease, smog, and thousands of premature deaths annually. Meeting America's strict emission standards while maintaining the performance and fuel economy Volkswagen promised was, engineers internally acknowledged, essentially impossible. Not difficult, not expensive, essentially impossible. So someone and investigators have never fully resolved exactly who gave the original order, decided to solve the engineering problem with software instead of engineering. The solution was called a defeat device. It was elegant, in a criminal sort of way. The software could detect when the vehicle was being tested for emissions. It recognized the specific conditions of a regulatory test: steering wheel position, speed patterns, even barometric pressure. When those conditions were detected, the engine switched into a compliant mode, cleaner, within legal limits. When the test ended, the engine switched back. On real roads, those engines were pumping out up to 40 times the permitted level of nitrogen oxide. This was not a rogue programmer. Internal Volkswagen documents later revealed that knowledge of the defeat device extended to multiple levels of the engineering and management structure. The software was installed across the Golf, Jetta, Passat, and Beetle lines. It was, in the most literal sense, a company policy. Between 2009 and 2015, Volkswagen ran advertising campaigns in the United States celebrating their clean diesel technology. They won awards. They received glowing coverage in automotive press. They sponsored environmental initiatives. The irony is almost too much to catalog. Clean diesel became a genuine market success. Volkswagen sold approximately 500,000 diesel vehicles in the United States alone during this period. Sales climbed. Market share grew. The strategy on its face was working, which is how fraud tends to feel, right up until it doesn't. The turning point did not come from a regulator. It came from a research team at West Virginia University. A group of researchers with a grant of roughly $50,000 and a portable emissions testing device they strapped to the back of a Volkswagen Jetta during an actual road test. In 2014, their findings were published. Real-world emissions from Volkswagen diesel vehicles were dramatically higher than laboratory results. The data was handed to the California Air Resources Board and then to the EPA. Volkswagen was contacted. They issued software updates. They claimed the discrepancy was a technical glitch. The EPA tested again. The emissions were still illegal. Volkswagen had tried to patch a cover-up with another cover-up. On September 18, 2015, the EPA issued its notice of violation. Volkswagen initially denied everything. Then, 3 days later, the company admitted it. Martin Winterkorn issued a public statement expressing he was, quote, deeply sorry. He resigned 5 days after the notice was issued. He would later be indicted in the United States on fraud and conspiracy charges he has never faced trial for, as Germany does not extradite its citizens. What followed was a financial reckoning of almost incomprehensible scale. Volkswagen stock dropped 23% in 2 trading days, a loss of roughly 15 billion euros in market value. Within a week, it had fallen further. The legal consequences accumulated over years. In the United States alone, Volkswagen agreed to settlements exceeding $14.7 billion, the largest automotive consumer settlement in American history at the time. That figure covered buybacks of affected vehicles, compensation to owners, and environmental remediation funds. Globally, total costs, including fines, legal settlements, vehicle buybacks, and remediation funds across multiple countries, reached an estimated $30 billion and beyond. 6 Volkswagen executives were indicted in the United States. 1. Oliver Schmidt, the company's emissions compliance manager in the U.S., was arrested at Miami Airport and sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. The human cost is harder to quantify but has been estimated. A study published in the journal Environmental Research Letters estimated that the excess nitrogen oxide emissions from Volkswagen's rigged vehicles in Europe alone contributed to an estimated 1,200 premature deaths. These were not hypothetical people. These were real consequences of a software switch someone decided to flip. Volkswagen survived. That is itself a remarkable fact. The company posted a net loss of approximately 1.6 billion euros in 2015, its first annual loss in decades. But the brand rebuilt. New management restructured. By 2023, Volkswagen Group was once again among the world's top-selling automakers. Resilience, apparently, is something you can afford when you are large enough. But here is what did not recover: trust in diesel technology across Europe. The scandal accelerated regulatory crackdowns on diesel engines continent-wide. Cities banned them. Governments fast-tracked electric vehicle incentives. Volkswagen itself committed to an aggressive pivot toward electric vehicles, a strategy they arguably would not have pursued with such urgency had the fraud never been exposed. The lie, in the end, burned down the very thing it was built to protect. The lesson here is not about software or emissions or regulatory gaps. The lesson is about what happens when a company decides that the rules apply to everyone except them. Volkswagen did not stumble into fraud. They engineered it deliberately, maintained it for years, and defended it until the evidence was mathematically undeniable. That is not a compliance failure. That is a culture failure, and culture failures at that scale always have a price. The most expensive lies are always the ones that work for a while. Because the longer they work, the more people inside the organization stop believing they are lies at all. Next, the story of Enron, a company that didn't just cook the books, they invented new books entirely, convinced Wall Street to applaud, and collapsed in 24 days. Subscribe for more hidden empires.